All right, what's up, everyone? So I want to talk about this Dr. Umar and Eminem discussion that's occurring right now. If you haven't heard, Dr. Umar was on the Joe Budden podcast on a Patreon episode, and he basically says that Eminem cannot be the GOAT of hip hop or one of the GOATs. And his arguments were primarily based on social reasonings, cultural reasonings. Obviously, Dr. Umar is a trained psychologist, so he's thinking more about how important it is to preserve the culture and uphold our grades first. And I want to make a video where I play devil's advocate, not saying that I agree or disagree with what he's saying, but I want to play devil's advocate, take Dr. Thomas's side, Dr. Umar's side, and give actual musical reasonings. So make an actual musical argument. Dr. Umar is not a musician, so he wasn't really able to give like a true musical argument for why Eminem can't be one of the GOATs of hip hop. So to start, we first need to look at our history to understand how we get to this point. So American music history, it has two lineages. It has the European or the white American lineage of music, and it has the Afro or the Black American lineage of music. The white American lineage of music is pretty much straightforward. They just took whatever they had going on in Europe and brought it over. So, for example, we see like the Star Spangled Banner is an old British drinking song. They just kind of brought it over here and made it into the national anthem. A Yankee Doodle was a song that British soldiers would sing to make fun of American soldiers. American soldiers hijacked it, made it into their own. So that's pretty much the lineage of like white American music here in America. It's just whatever's happening in Europe, we're going to try and do it over here. Now, with the Black lineage music or the Afro lineage of music, we know that it's primarily influenced from Western Africa. It comes from Western Africa. We know that they were brought here to the States to work plantation fields as slaves, and they bring their musical traditions to the Americas. On the plantation fields, they developed this style of music called work songs and field hollers. So that's where it kind of starts. Then from that, it evolves into the blues, Mississippi Delta blues. Then after that, we get ragtime, where we get the introduction of syncopation, which leads us into swing, Dixieland, New Orleans style of music, collective improvisation, which lead us into jazz. And then jazz, obviously, we get the big band boom. And once the Great Depression occurs, there's no longer money to pay for big bands. So these big band musicians kind of scatter, and some of them go and do this other style of music called bebop, and others go ahead and start doing studio work. And this is kind of where I want to start is these musicians start doing studio work. We're into the late 1930s, early 1940s, and they developed the style of music called rhythm and blues, or R&B. Now, obviously, we're in a segregated America, so everything's kind of like white America's doing this, and they have access to these systems and these institutions, and Black Americans are kind of over here. So rhythm and blues is indeed the beginning of rock and roll. We see artists like Louis Jordan and his Timpani 5. This is an example of actual rhythm and blues. So how did it become rock and roll? Well, that's a pretty simple explanation. Black artists did not have access to the white institutions, the white record labels, the white marketing, all those things. So they create their own institution called Race Records. Race Records were compilation albums that were marketed to Black audiences at Black institutions. So like at Black grocery stores, convenience stores, gas stations, barbershops, etc., etc. And these compilation albums would have anything from comedy skits to classical music by Black composers, jazz music, and this new emerging style of music called rhythm and blues. So this artists like Louis Jordan and this emerging style of rhythm and blues became so popular, not only amongst the black young audience, but white young audiences also started to get hip to this style of music called rhythm and blues. And it started becoming so popular amongst white young Americans, that this DJ by the name of Alan Freed picked up on this trend, and he wanted to play rhythm and blues on his radio station, but he couldn't play rhythm and blues because he knew that brand was associated with a black audience, and plus he wasn't allowed to. So he rebrands rhythm and blues and calls it rock and roll. Rock and roll was just slang back in those days for, well, you can Google it and look it up yourself. And he starts playing black artists on the radio under this new brand called rock and roll. And his radio show goes, woof, super popular. Record labels pick up on this and they want a piece of the action. Obviously, they can't play rhythm and blues, and they can't sign these black artists to their record label. So what they do is that they take white artists and just have them play rock and roll or rhythm and blues. And we see artists, for example, like a Pat Boone. A Pat Boone is artist who was just basically stealing music from black artists, particularly Little Richard. So we have a Little Richard making rock and roll at a very high level, but then we have a Pat Boone who's stealing music from a Little Richard, and has the backing of major labels, major marketing, etc., etc. And this is like a trend that continues throughout the history of rock and roll. Same thing with Elvis. We have Elvis, but he's taking music from Big Mama Cass. You ain't nothing but a groundhog or ground dog, whatever it is. So we have a Chuck Berry, and then he gets countered by a white version, which is an Elvis. We have a Little Richard, but he gets countered by a white version, which is Pat Boone. And this is kind of where I want to focus this, kind of the thesis of this whole argument is, we're looking at an Elvis who gets crowned. This is an artist who's playing black music from a black American lineage, and he gets crowned as the king, right? So not saying that Elvis wasn't talented or he wasn't charismatic or good. He could have been all those things. I'm not saying that he was a malicious person. But the fact is that he was giving a huge systemic advantage, right? He was being able to steal music from great black artists. He had major marketing, major labels backing him. And even with all those systemic advantages, we still cannot say that he was definitively better than a Chuck Berry or a Little Richard. And that's why we cannot say that he's the king or even one of the kings, because who knows, without that systemic advantage, if we'd even be talking about Elvis today. Okay, so let's move the conversation beyond Elvis. So white America basically hijacks rhythm and blues or rock and roll. Black America keeps evolving. So we go from rhythm and blues / rock and roll to they start doing funk music, to they start doing soul music, to Motown, and then eventually we get to hip hop. So it's important to understand that even though there were many different contributors in early hip hop is from the black American lineage of music. Hip hop could not have started in Puerto Rico. It couldn't have started in the Caribbean. It couldn't have started anywhere else but in America. It's only because of the black Americans' experience that we can birth a hip hop. So even though there were many different contributors to hip hop, early hip hop, we know that it comes from the black American lineage of music. In addition to that, we can also hear like some of the early fathers of hip hop, like the Africa Bambatas or the Cool Herc, who were literally throwing block parties or organizing community groups for the uplifting of the black community. So the black American experience had a whole lot to do with, even though many different people helped and contributed, it was the Black American experience that inspired the birth of a hip hop. So we get a hip hop, and then most music historians say that around the time when, I don't know if it's 89, but around the time where Run DMC does the collaboration with Aerosmith, this is where most people say that hip hop sold out. This is where we say that hip hop went corporate and it sold out to white America. And Dr. Thomas alludes to this when he says that once hip hop sells out, we get more gangster rap. So the image, we go from uplifting a community to uplifting Black America to now all of a sudden it goes corporate. And immediately after it goes corporate, we start seeing kind of like the promoting or the marketing of like all the negative stereotypes of Black America through hip hop music. So we fast forward now to an Eminem, early 2000s, late 90s. What does any of this have to do with an Eminem? Well, similar to Elvis, Eminem has that systemic advantage. He comes right off the bat. He gets to work with the greatest producer, one of the great producers, Dr. Dre. He gets to be on one of the top labels. So he has all these advantages, all these systemic advantages. Again, similarly to Elvis, not saying that Eminem is not skilled. He is a skilled rapper, but we cannot deny his systemic advantages. And he goes on to, make all these hits. So I've already established that Eminem had a systemic advantage similar to Elvis. But now let's take a look at Eminem musically. Like, is he really on a musical, like all this social stuff aside, like musically, can Eminem be considered one of the GOATs? And even then, I think the answer is no. So we need to understand that we know that Eminem is making hip hop, which is a Black form of music. Well, what are the criterias? What were the criterias pre-Eminem for like great hip hop music? Well, pre-Eminem, we were talking about Biggie and Pac, who both obviously had mainstream success with party music, but also there was a certain soulful element there. There was a certain element of things, musics that they made, songs that they made that resonated with the culture, whether it was Brenda's Got a Baby or Thug's Mansion. They were saying culturally impactful things with a lot of soul, a lot of relevancy. Same thing with Biggie's his Ready to Die album. Yes, it had the hits, but he was saying things that were culturally relevant and impactful in a soulful way, in a smooth and slick way, without sounding preachy. But then we get to Eminem, and all of a sudden, Eminem is not saying anything that's relevant to the Black community. He's actually talking about taking pills, killing his mom, killing his girlfriend. So even on that front, Eminem is not really trying to connect with the Afro or the Black American experience. So right off the bat, that disqualifies him. Even though he's rapping, he's not hip hop. And that's something important to really understand. Like, yes, not all rappers are hip hop. Eminem never, in my opinion, I can't think of anything in any way that he tried to be hip hop musically. He was always kind of talking about the white American experience. So then, from a musical front, he cannot be the best artist, the best hip hop GOAT, or the GOAT of hip hop, because he isn't hip hop. He is not hip hop. He never tried to be hip hop. He never pretended like he was hip hop. Did he put on some great artists like D12, 50 Cent? Yes. So again, it goes back to the argument similar to Elvis. He's probably a nice guy. He's tried to help. And I've actually heard Eminem at a war show propping up the legends, understanding that he's a visitor in a space that's not his community. So Eminem's not a bad person, but we need to understand that he is not a hip hop artist. He is, just a really, really, really good rapper. So then we know that from a business standpoint, we can't look at numbers or commercial success because he had an unfair advantage, systemic advantage. We can't look at it from a hip-hop lens. We can't judge through a hip-hop lens because he's not really hip-hop. And we can't really, so then the third thing that we can judge him is just on a technical plane, which is what a lot of people say. Oh, he rap God, he rap faster than everybody else. So is he the greatest technical rapper of all time? Like, is he the best person ever to put words together? And again, I don't know, like, we can't. And even if we could, like, who cares? It's a very shallow way of looking at music, like through just a technical point of view. Music is more than just technique. It's meant to make you feel something or whatever. So, is he the GOAT? My answer to that is no. When you look at someone like Jay-Z, Biggie, who started way back in the race, Eminem had a systemic advantage, and even same as Elvis, we can't definitively say that he's the GOAT or one of the GOATs. Like, if you have that much of a head start, that much of an advantage, there should be no question who the GOAT is. But with M, we cannot say that. So because of that, I don't even think we can qualify him as even one of the GOATs. He's just a very talented technical rapper. And that's okay. So with all this in mind, I'm wrapping up now. Do I agree with Dr. Thomas, Dr. Umar? No, I'm just playing devil's advocate. I don't really know. Is Eminem one of the GOATs or not? Like, I mean, music means different things to different people. To maybe white America, he might be the GOAT because he's talking about things that resonate with white culture. Or maybe if you're a black American who grew up around like white America, it might resonate with you. To some other people, it might not. It might just sound like someone's talking fast or whatever. So music means different things to different people. I think all music has value. So I think this conversation, even though I just went on a rant, music has different values to different people, and it's all good. Like, as long as it makes you feel good, like, that's all that matters. But when we're having these conversations, like what Dr. Umar was alluding to, I think we need to be sensitive about America's history, because it is because of America's history that we are where we are, where we're having these conversations. Like, in an utopian society, we wouldn't even be having these conversations. We would just be looking at the artistry. But it's not like that in America. Hopefully this video was informative. Do I like Eminem? Of course. Like, come on, like, Eminem, I like Eminem. I think he's great. Do I think he's one of the GOATs? To some Americans, he's the GOAT, and that's completely valid because their feelings and their thoughts and their opinions are valid. At the end of the day, music is just all opinion based. But the history, because we are in America, the history matters. The history matters. It plays a big role. All right, so hopefully you all learned something. Hopefully this helped. I kind of did it off the top of my brain. In case you're wondering who I am, I'm a music producer. I made beats. I went to college for music, all those things. So hopefully this stuff makes sense. And let me know what you think in the comments. Peace.